Chapter 5, in which we hear of the Mameluke Hunt and of how the Moominhouse is changed into a jungle. It was somewhere about the end of July and very hot in Moomin Valley. Not even the flies bothered to buzz. The trees seemed to be tired. The river was no longer fit for raspberry juice, but flowed narrow and brown through the dusty countryside. The hobgoblin's hat, which had been taken back into favor, stood on the chest of drawers under the mirror. Day after day, the sun beat down on the little valley lying hidden between the hills. The small, creeping things hid themselves in the cool darkness. The birds were silent, and Moomintroll and his friends got peevish and quarreled amongst themselves. "Mother," said Moomintroll, "find us something to do. We just quarrel, and it's so hot." "Yes, dear," said Moomin Mamma, "I've noticed that, and I should be glad to get rid of you for a bit. Can't you go off into the cave for a few days? It's cooler there, and you can swim and laze all day without disturbing anyone." "Can we sleep in the cave too?" Moomintroll asked excitedly. "Certainly," said Moomin Mamma, "and don't come home until you're better tempered." It was very thrilling to live in the cave. In the middle of the sandy floor they put a kerosene lamp, and then everyone dug a hole to fit himself and made a bed in it. The provisions were divided into 6 big equal portions, which included raisin pudding and pumpkin jam, bananas, marzipan pigs, and sweet maize, and a pancake as well for breakfast next day. A little breeze came murmuring sadly across the lonely shore, while the sun sank in a red glow, filling the cave with its last rays, a reminder of the mysterious darkness that was to come. Then Snufkin played his mouth organ, while Snork Maiden laid her curly head in Moomintroll's lap, and everyone began to feel comfy inside after the raisin pudding. And as twilight came stealing into the cave, a nice creepy feeling came over them. Sniff pointed out for the 100th time that it was he who had found the cave first, but for once nobody bothered to squash him. Then Snufkin lit the lamp and asked, "Shall I tell you something awful?" The Hemulin immediately wanted to know about how awful. "About as awful as this," said Snufkin, stretching out his arms as wide as possible, "if you're any the wiser." "No, I'm not," replied the Hemulin, "but go ahead, Snufkin, and I'll tell you when I get frightened." "Good," said Snufkin. "It's a strange story, and I got it from the magpie. Well, at the end of the world there lies a mountain so high it makes you dizzy even to think about it. It is as black as soot, as smooth as silk, terribly steep, and where there should be a bottom, there are only clouds. But high up on the peak stands the hobgoblin's house, and it looks like this." And Snufkin drew a house in the sand. "Hasn't it got any windows?" asked Sniff. "No," said Snufkin, "and it hasn't a door either." "Because the hobgoblin always goes home by air riding on a black panther. He goes out every night and collects rubies in his hat." "What did you say?" asked Sniff, with his eyes popping out of his head. "Rubies? Where does he get them from?" The hobgoblin can change himself into anything he likes," Snufkin answered, "and then he can crawl under the ground and even down onto the seabed where buried treasure lies." "What does he do with all those precious stones?" asked Sniff, enviously. "Nothing, he just collects them," said Snufkin, "like the Hemulin collects plants." "What was that?" asked the Hemulin, waking up in his hole. "I was saying that the hobgoblin has a whole house full of rubies," went on Snufkin. "They lie in heaps all over the place and are set into the walls like wild beasts' eyes. The hobgoblin's house has no roof, and the clouds that fly over it are as red as blood with the reflection of the rubies. His eyes are red too, and they shine in the dark." Now I'm nearly frightened, said the Hemulin. Do be careful how you go on. How happy he must be, this hobgoblin, exclaimed Sniff. He isn't a bit, replied Snufkin, and he won't be until he finds the king's ruby. It's almost as big as the Black Panther's head, and to look into it is like looking at leaping flames. The hobgoblin has looked for the king's ruby on all the planets, including Neptune, but he hasn't found it. Just now he has gone off to the moon to search in the craters, but he hasn't much hope of success because in his heart of hearts the hobgoblin believes that the king's ruby lies in the sun, where he can never go because it's too hot. But is this all true? Asked the Snork's suspicious voice. Think what you like, said Snufkin, carelessly peeling his banana. Do you know what the magpie thinks? She thinks that the hobgoblin had a tall black hat and a hat that he lost when he went to the moon a couple months ago. You don't mean it, burst out Moomintroll, and the others made exciting noises. What's that? Inquired the Hemulin. What are you talking about? The hat, Sniff told him. The tall black hat I found last spring. The hobgoblin's hat. Snufkin nodded meaningly. But suppose he comes back for his hat, asked the trembling Snork Maiden. I shall never dare to look at his red eyes. We must talk to Mother about this, said Moomintroll. Is it far to the moon? Quite a distance, answered Snufkin. Besides, it's sure to take the hobgoblin a long time to search through all the craters. There was an anxious silence for a time, while everyone thought about the black hat standing in the chest of drawers under the mirror at home. Turn up the lamp a little, quavered Sniff. Suddenly, the Hemulin jumped and said, Did you hear anything out there, outside? They stared toward the black mouth of the cave and listened. Soft pattering sounds. Could it be a panther's footsteps? It's only the rain, said Moomintroll. The rain has come at last. Now we'll sleep for a bit. And they crept into their sand-holes and pulled the blankets over them. Moomintroll put out the lamp and, with the rain whispering outside, he floated off to sleep. The Hemulin woke up with a start. He had been dreaming that he was in a small, leaky boat, and the water had just reached his chin when, to his horror, the dream turned into real life. The rain had come through the door, or come through the roof during the night, and it had drained in absolute torrents in the poor Hemulin's bed. Misery me, he groaned. Then he wrung out his dress and went to look at the weather. It was the same everywhere, gray and wet and miserable. The Hemulin wished he felt like a bath, but he didn't. Yesterday it was too hot, and now it's too wet. I shall go in and lie down again, he said. The Snork's sand-hole looked quite dry. Look, said the Hemulin, it has rained in my bed. Bad luck, said the Snork, and turned over on his other side. So I think I shall sleep in your hole, announced the Hemulin. No snoring now. But the Snork only grunted a little and slept on. Then the Hemulin's heart was filled with a desire for revenge, and he dug a trench between his own sand-hole and the Snork's. That was most unhemulinish, said the Snork, sitting up in his wet blanket. I'm amazed you had the brains to think of it. Well, I'm a bit surprised myself, said the Hemulin. And now, what shall we do today? The Snork stuck his nose out of the mouth of the cave and looked at the sky and the sea. Then he said, knowingly, Fishing. Wake up the others while I go and get the boat in order. And he strolled down on the wet sand and out onto the landing stage, which Moominpapa had built, sniffing the sea air. It was quite still. The rain was falling softly, and each drop made a ring in the gleaming water. The Snork nodded to himself and took out the longest fishing line they had. Then he hauled out the landing net and baited the hooks while he whistled Snufkin's hunting song. Everything was ready when the others came out of the cave. Ah, there you are at last, said the Snork. Hemel, take down the mast and put in the rowlocks. Must we fish? Must we fish? Asked the Snook Maiden. Nothing ever happens when we fish. I'm so sorry for the little pike. Yes, but today something is going to happen, said her brother. You sit in the bows where you'll be least in the way. Let me help too, squeaked Sniff. Catching hold of the line, he leapt down onto the edge of the boat, which tipped up, and the line got all tangled with the rowlocks and the anchor. Splendid, said the Snork sarcastically. Quite splendid. Thoroughly accustomed to the sea, peace in the boat, and all that, above all respect for other people's work. Ha! Aren't you going to scold him? The Hemulin asked incredulously. Scold I? Said the Snork, and laughed mirthlessly. Has the captain anything to say? Never! Put out the line as it is. It might catch an old boot. And he retired into the stern and dragged a tarpaulin over his head. Goodness gracious me, said Moomintroll. You had better take the oars, Snufkin, while we unravel this mess. Sniff, you're an ass. I know, said Sniff, glad to have something to do. Which end shall we begin? In the middle, said Moomintroll, but don't get your tail tangled up in it too. Snufkin. And Snufkin slowly rowed the adventure out to sea. While all this was happening, Moomin was bustling about, feeling very pleased. The rain fell gently on the garden. Peace, order, and quiet reigned everywhere. Now everything will grow, said Moomin to herself. And oh, how wonderful to have her family safely away in the cave. She decided to do a bit of tidying up, and began collecting socks, orange peel, Moomintroll's queer stones, bits of bark, and all sorts of odd things. In the wireless set, she found some poisonous pink perennials that the Hemulin had forgotten to put up into his plant press. Moomin twirled them into a ball while she listened thoughtfully to the soft murmur of the rain. Now everything will grow, she said once again, and without thinking what she was doing, she dropped the ball into the hobgoblin's hat. Then she went up into her room for a snooze, for Moomin dearly loves to snooze while the rain patters on the roof. Meanwhile, in the depths of the sea lay the Snork's long fishing line, waiting. It had already waited 2 hours, and the Snork Maiden was getting desperately impatient. Anticipation is the best part, Moomintroll told her. There might be something on every hook, you know. The fishing line had lots of hooks. The Snork Maiden sighed a little. Anyway, you know what? You know that when you sink the line, it has bait on it, and when you haul it up, it has fish. But there might be nothing at all, said Snufkin. Or there might be an octopus, said the Hemulin. Girls never understand these things, said the Snork. Now we can begin to pull it up, but nobody must make a sound. Be quiet, everyone. The first hook came up. It was empty. The second hook came up. It was empty too. It only shows that the fish go deep and are awfully big, said the Snork. Quiet now, everybody. He pulled up 4 more empty hooks and said, This is a cunning one. He's eaten up all our bait. Gosh, he must be huge. Everyone leant over the side and peered down into the black depths. What sort of fish do you think it is? Asked Sniff. A Mameluke at least, said the Snork. Look, 10 more empty hooks. Dear, dear, said the Snork Maiden sarcastically. Dear, dear to you, said her brother angrily, and went on hauling. Be quiet, otherwise you'll frighten him away. Hook after hook came up twisted with seagrass and seaweed. No fish. Absolutely nothing at all. Suddenly the Snork shouted, Look out! It gave a pull. I'm absolutely sure it gave a pull. A Mameluke! Squeaked Sniff. Now you must keep calm, said the Snork, who felt anything but calm himself. Dead silence! Here he comes! The tight line had suddenly gone limp, but far down in the mysterious green depths gleamed something white. Was it the Mameluke's pale belly? Something huge and terrible seemed to rise up from the strange underwater scene. It was green and mushy like the stem of a great jungle plant, and it slid up under the boat. "The landing net!" screamed the Snork. "Where's the landing net?" At the same moment the air was filled with noise and of flying foam. A terrific wave caught the adventurer up on its crest and dashed the fishing line down on the deck. Then, suddenly, it was all still again. Only the broken line dangled sadly over the side, and a huge whirl in the water marked where the monster had passed. "Now who said it was a pike?" the Snork asked his sister bitterly. "I shall never get over this as long as I live." "This is where it broke," said the Hemulin, holding the line. "Something told me it was too thin." "Oh, do shut up," said the Snork, and he hid his face in his paw. The Hemulin wanted to say something, but Snufkin kicked him in the shins. They all sat in hopeless silence. Then the Snork Maiden said, rather timidly, "What do you think about having another try? We could use the painter for a line." The Snork grunted. After a while he said, "And what about the hooks?" "Your pocket knife," said the Snork Maiden. "If you open the blade and the corkscrew and the screwdriver and the instrument for taking out stones of horses' hooves, he's sure to catch on to something." The Snork took his paws away from his eyes and said, "Yes, but we haven't any bait." "Pancake," said his sister. The Snork considered this for a time, while they all held their breath with excitement. At last he said, "Of course if the Mameluke eats Pancake, then—" And everyone knew that the hunt would go on. They tied the pocket knife firmly to the painter with a bit of wire that the Hemulin had in his skirt pocket. They stuck the pancake on the knife, and dropped the whole lot overboard. Now the Snork Maiden's blood was up, and she was excited as the others. "You're like Diana," said Moomintroll admiringly. "Who's that?" she asked. "Goddess of the chase," he replied. "As beautiful as the Wooden Queen and as clever as you." Said the Snork Maiden. At that moment the adventurer keeled over a little. "Hush," said the Snork, "he's nibbling." There was another twitch, this time more violent, and then came a furious jerk that knocked them all over. "Help!" screamed Sniff. "He's going to gobble us up." The adventurer's bows dipped alarmingly, but she righted herself again and set off at a terrific speed toward the open sea. The painter was stretched out, tight as a bowstring, in front of her and disappeared in a flurry of foam below the surface. The Mameluke obviously liked Pancake. "Keep calm," yelled the Snork. "Calm in the boat, every man to his posts." "As long as he doesn't dive," thought the Snufkin, creeping into the bows. But the Mameluke set a course straight out to sea, and soon the shore lay like the sweep of a paintbrush far behind them. "How long do you think he will be able to hold on?" asked the Hemulin. "If the worst comes to the worst, we can cut the line," said Sniff. "Never," declared the Snork Maiden, shaking her curly fringe. And then the Mameluke gave his huge tail a whisk and swung round, making for the coast again. "He's going a little slower now," shouted Moomintroll, who was on his knees in the bows. "He's beginning to get tired." The Mameluke was tired, but he also had begun to get angry. He gave the line a jerk, and then tore off again so that the adventurer rocked about in the most alarming way. Sometimes he lay quite still, trying to fool them, and then suddenly he would set off with such speed that a tidal wave almost swamped them. So Snufkin took his mouth organ and played his hunting song, while the others beat time with so much energy that the deck shook. And then, when they had almost given up hope, the Mameluke floated over on his back, turning his huge, lifeless belly up to the light. They had never seen such a big fish. They contemplated it for a moment, in silence, and then the Snork said, "Well, I got him at last, didn't I?" And his sister proudly agreed. While the Mameluke was being towed to land, it began to rain, and soon the Hemulin's dress got wet through. and Snufkin's hat lost what it was left of his shape, which wasn't much. It'll probably be pretty wet in the cave now, said Moomintroll, who sat freezing at the oars. Mother may be worried, he added after a while. You mean that we could sort of go home presently? Said Sniff, trying not to sound too hopeful. Yes, and show them the fish, said the Snark. We will go home, said the Hemulin. Strange adventures and getting wet and carrying on alone and that sort of thing are all very well, but they're not comfortable in the long run. So they put boards under the Mameluke, and everyone helped to carry him through the woods. His wide open mouth was so big that the branches caught in his teeth, and he weighed so many hundreds of pounds that they had to rest every few minutes. Meanwhile, the rain got worse and worse, until, when they got to their valley, it hid the whole house. What about leaving him here for a bit? Suggested Sniff. Not on your life, said Moomintroll indignantly, and they plunged on through the garden. Suddenly the Snork stood stock still. We've come the wrong way, he said. Nonsense, said Moomintroll. Isn't that the woodshed? And down there's the bridge. Yes, but where's the house? Asked the Snork. It was most extraordinary. Moominhouse had vanished. Quite simply, it wasn't there. They laid down the Mameluke in front of the steps, at least that is to say, where the steps ought to have been. Instead... But first I must explain what had happened in the valley while they were out on the Mameluke hunt. Moomin Mama had gone upstairs for a snooze, but before doing so she had dropped the ball of poisonous pink perennials into the hobgoblin's hat in an absent-minded moment. The trouble was she should never have tied it up, really, for while the house lay deep in its after-lunch nap, the ball of poisonous pink perennials began to grow in a strange and bewitched fashion. It twisted slowly up out of the hat and crept down onto the floor. Tendrils and shoots groped their way up the walls, clambered round the curtains and the blind cords, and scrambled through the cracks, ventilators, and keyholes. In the damp air, flowers came out, and fruit began to ripen, and huge leafy shoots blotted out the stairs, pushed their way between the legs of furniture, and hung in the festoons from the chandelier. The house was filled with a soft, rustling sound. Sometimes the pop of an opening bud could be heard, or the thud of ripe fruit falling on the carpet. But Moomin Mama thought it was only the rain, and turned over on her other side and went back to sleep. In the next room, Moomin Papa sat writing his memoirs. Nothing amusing had happened since he had built the landing stage. So he went on with the story of his childhood, and this brought up such memories that he nearly burst into tears. He had always been a bit out of the ordinary as a child, and nobody had ever understood him. When he got older, it was much the same, and he had had a frightful time in every way. Moomin Papa wrote and wrote, thinking how sorry everyone would be when they read this story. And this cheered him up again, and he said to himself, "It will serve them jolly well right." Just then, a ripe plum fell onto his paper and made a big, sticky blot. "Bless my tail!" burst out Moomin Papa. "Moomintroll and Sniff must be home again." And he turned round to scold them, but nobody was behind him. Instead, he found himself staring at a thick bush covered with yellow berries. He jumped up, and at once blue plums rained down on him from every side. Then he noticed that a great branch was growing slowly toward the window, with green shoots sprouting in all directions. "Hello!" yelled Moomin Papa. "Wake up, everybody! Come quickly!" Moomin Mama woke up with a start, and, to her amazement, saw that the room was full of small white flowers, hanging down from the ceiling in leafy garlands. "Oh, how beautiful!" she said. "Moomintroll must have done this as a surprise for me." And she carefully drew aside the thin curtain of flowers by her bed and stepped onto the floor. "Hello!" Moomin Papa was still yelling from the other side of the wall. "Open the door! I can't get out!" But Moomin Mama couldn't open the door to his room because it was completely overgrown with creepers. So she broke a pane of glass in her own door and, with enormous difficulty, squeezed through onto the landing. There was a small forest on the staircase, and the drawing room was a positive jungle. "Dear me," said Moomin Mamma, "of course it's the hat again," and she sat down and fanned herself with a palm leaf. And the shoots grew up through the chimneys and climbed down over the roof, covering the whole of Moominhouse with a thick green carpet, while out in the rain Moomintroll stood and stared at the big green mound where the flowers went on opening their petals, and fruit ripened from green to yellow, from yellow to red. "He used to be here anyhow," said Sniff. "It's inside," said Moomintroll miserably, "but we can't get in and they can't get out." Snufkin went off to explore the green mound. There was no window or door, only a dense wild mass of vegetation. He took hold of a creeper which turned out to be as tough as rubber and impossible to move. But as he went by it threw a loop, as if on purpose, round his hat and lifted it right off his head. "More hobgoblinery," muttered Snufkin. "It's beginning to get tiresome." Meanwhile Sniff ran across the overgrown veranda and, with a delighted squeak, discovered that the door to the cellar was still open. Moomintroll hurried after him and peered in through the black hole. "In with you all," he said, "but hurry up before it gets overgrown here, too." And they crawled into the dark cellar, one after the other. "Hi!" shouted the Hemulin, who was last. "I can't get through." "Then you can stay outside and guard the Mameluke," said the Snort. "You can botanize on the house now, can you?" And while the poor Hemulin whimpered outside in the rain, the others groped their way up the cellar steps. "We're in luck," said Moomintroll when he reached the top. "The door's open. It pays to be careless sometimes." "I'm the culprit," squeaked Sniff, "so you can thank me." As they pushed through the door, a remarkable sight met their eyes. The muskrat was sitting in the fork of a tree, eating a pear. "Where's Mother?" asked Moomintroll. "She's trying to get your father out of his room," replied the muskrat bitterly. "This is what comes of collecting plants. I've never quite trusted that Hemulin. Well, I hope the muskrat heaven is a peaceful place, because I shan't be here any longer." They listened for a moment to the sound of enormous axe blows coming from upstairs. Then came a crash and a whoop of joy. Moomin Papa was free! "Mama! Papa!" shouted Moomintroll, pushing his way through the jungle to the bottom of the stairs. "What have you been doing while I was away?" "Well, dear," replied Moomin Mamma, "we must have been careless with the hobgoblin's hat again. But come up here. I found a gooseberry bush in the wardrobe." It was a thrilling afternoon. They played a jungle game, in which Moomintroll was Tarzan, and the Snort Maiden was Jane. Sniff was Tarzan's son, and Snufkin was the chimpanzee cheetah, while the Snort crawled about in the undergrowth with huge teeth made of orange peel, pretending to be the enemy. "Now I shall steal Jane away," he cried, dragging the Snort Maiden by the tail to a hole underneath the dining room table, so that Moomintroll, when he came home to their house in the chandelier, and discovered what had happened, had to lower himself to the ground on a creeper and dash off to the rescue. Then he produced a Tarzan roar from the top of the airing cupboard, and Jane and the rest of them roared back. "Well, things can't get much worse, that's one consolation," the muskrat groaned. He had hidden himself in a forest of bracken in the bathroom, and had wrapped his head in a handkerchief so that nothing should grow into his ears. But Moomin Mamma was quite unperturbed. "Well, well," she said, "it seems to me that our guests are having a very good time." "I hope so," replied Moomin Papa. "Pass me a banana, please, dear." And so it went on until the evening. Nobody bothered about whether the cellar door was getting overgrown, and nobody even thought about poor Hemulin. He still sat, with his wet dress flapping around his legs, guarding the Mameluke. Sometimes he ate an apple or counted the stamens on a jungle flower, but in between he mostly sighed. It had stopped raining, and the night began to fall, And at that moment the sun went down something and at the moment the sun went down something happened to the green mound that was Moominhouse. It began to wither as quickly as it had grown. The fruit shriveled and fell to the ground, the flowers dropped and the leaves curled up, and once more the house was filled with rustlings and cracklings. The Hemulin watched for a bit, and then went and pulled gently at a branch. It came off at once and was as dry as tinder. Then the Hemulin had an idea. He collected a huge pile of sticks and branches, went to the woodshed for matches, and then lit a crackling bonfire in the middle of the garden path. Pleased and happy he sat himself down beside the blaze to dry his dress, and after a while he had another idea. With super-Hemulinish strength he dragged the Mameluke's tail into the fire. Baked fish was the best thing he had ever tasted. Thus it was that when the Moomin family and their friends pushed their way through the veranda and burst the door open, they found a very happy Hemulin, who had already eaten up 1/7 of the Mameluke. "You wretch!" said the Snark. "How can I weigh my fish now?" "Weigh me and add it on," suggested Hemulin. It was one of his brighter days. "Now we'll burn up the jungle," said Moomin Papa, and they carried out all the rubbish from the house and made a bigger bonfire than anyone had ever seen in the valley before. The Mameluke was baked whole in the embers and eaten up from tip to tail, but long afterwards there were quarrels about how long he had been. Had he stretched from the bottom of the veranda steps to the woodshed, or only as far as the lilac bushes?